Gemini, someone is going to talk to you urgently, and there's a powerful reason. That strange weight in your chest when you're alone. That sudden breathlessness when everything around you seems calm. That inexplicable pull toward a name, a memory, a presence that hasn't fully left. If so, this message is not random. It's your soul tuning into a vibration that is about to break the silence. Because someone is preparing to speak with you, not casually, not socially, but urgently. And the reason behind it carries a kind of emotional charge that can alter your perception, your path, and perhaps even your sense of self. There's something they need to say, something that has been kept in the shadows, protected by fear, hesitation, or timing. And now the moment is drawing near when this truth must be spoken. You may already know who this person is. Or maybe you just feel it, an energy circling closer, waiting to collide with yours. What matters now isn't control. It's readiness. Because what's coming is not just a conversation. It's a mirror, and what you see in it will stay with you for a long time. If your heart is already stirring, if part of you whispered I knew it, then stay close. Like, share and subscribe, because what we're about to unlock together could change everything. Gate 1, the unspoken energy between you and them. Gemini, there is something strange happening beneath the surface of your everyday life. You can feel it, can't you? That subtle yet persistent vibration just under your skin. That sensation that someone, somewhere, is thinking of you with intensity. You may brush it off as coincidence or imagination, but deep down you know better. You know what it feels like when your energy is being pulled, gently, persistently, towards someone who carries a truth they can no longer keep hidden. There's a conversation forming in the background of your life, one that hasn't yet begun in words, but is already resounding through emotion, memory, and spirit. This isn't just about curiosity or nostalgia. It's not someone reaching out because they're bored or lonely. This is something different, urgent, necessary. It's the kind of conversation that arrives when the soul has carried too much weight for too long and the silence can no longer hold it. This person, whoever they are, has been standing at the threshold of speaking for far longer than you realize. They've thought about the right time, the right words, the right way to reach you, but no moment ever felt safe enough. No sentence ever seemed to do justice to the depth of what they needed to say. And so they stayed silent, even as the truth kept expanding inside them. Until now. Now, the silence has reached its edge. The weight of the unsaid has become too heavy. And this person, someone you've known deeply, someone whose voice used to echo through the most vulnerable parts of your world, is about to speak. Their message is not light. It carries the weight of memory, of decisions once made in fear, of truths they have come to see only in your absence. And what's most important is not what they say. It's why they're saying it now. Because the urgency is not just theirs. It's yours too. Gemini, you've grown. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Over the last few months, you've begun to sense a disconnect between the life you built and the person you're becoming. Your conversations feel shallower. Your laughter more forced. You started questioning what you once accepted, craving more depth, more truth, more alignment. You've looked at old relationships with new eyes. You've replayed conversations, decisions, partings. And though you may not have said it aloud, you've been hoping just a little that something from the past might resurface, not to take you backward, but to offer a deeper kind of closure or clarity. That hope hasn't been in vain. The person coming toward you carries something you need to hear, not to heal them, but to free you. They've been watching from afar, noticing the way you move through the world now, how you've softened in some places and toughened in others, how you speak more honestly than before, but also hide your heart more carefully. They've seen the way you shrink back when you should shine, the way you hold back your truth to keep the peace. And it's not because they want to challenge you or hurt you. It's because they can no longer bear to witness the quiet erosion of who you truly are. They remember a version of you, unguarded, expansive, alive. And they want to speak to that version again. The words they bring may not be polished. They may stumble. They may be overwhelmed. But the message will be clear. They will name the moments that mattered. They will speak the truths they never dared say. They will admit to the ways they misunderstood you, underestimated you. and perhaps even contributed to your withdrawal from your own light. And when they speak, it won't just be about the past. It will be about who you've become since then. It will be an acknowledgement of your growth, your radiance, your resilience. And in that moment, you will be faced with a powerful mirror, not just of who you were with them, but of how far you've come without them. This person may be someone from your romantic past, or it could be a friend, a sibling, a mentor, someone who shaped your emotional landscape in profound ways. And you may already feel who it is. Their energy has been hovering just beyond your conscious mind, surfacing in dreams, in random memories, in sudden waves of emotion. You felt their name press against your lips even when you didn't speak it. You've wondered why their absence still echoes. The answer is because the conversation wasn't finished. And now, the universe is preparing you to finish it. Gemini, your soul is tired of rehearsing the same self-protections. You're no longer satisfied with surface harmony that hides deeper truths. You want authenticity, even if it's messy. You want peace, but not at the cost of your own voice. And this upcoming conversation is part of that realignment. You're being invited to step out of performance and into presence, to listen not just with your mind, but with your body, to feel not just what's being said, but what's being meant. Because this person is not coming to reopen wounds. They're coming to acknowledge them, to name what was left unsaid, to bring light to what remained in the dark for too long. And in doing so, they will offer you something rare, the chance to reclaim a part of yourself you thought you had to leave behind. Not to reattach, not to revisit old pain, but to release it. This is not just their healing. It's yours. The conversation you're about to have may only last minutes, but the echoes will shape you for years. And when it ends, you won't be the same. You will be freer, lighter, more whole. Because when the truth finally finds its voice, it frees more than just a speaker. It frees everyone who's ever carried the silence. Gate 2, the truth they've been holding back, and why it's finally time to say it. Gemini, when someone carries a truth for too long, it changes them. It distorts how they see themselves, how they relate to others, and how they show up in the world. It becomes a weight they try to normalize, a silence they learn to live around. But no matter how long it's buried, the truth always finds a way to rise. And the person who's coming to speak to you, urgently, vulnerably, is someone who's been carrying a truth with your name written on it. For days, for years, for lifetimes, perhaps, they've known this truth wasn't theirs to keep forever. And now, the time to release it has finally arrived. This person has seen the cost of their silence. They've watched you navigate life without certain answers. They've seen you second-guess moments that were real, question dynamics that were never fully explained. Wonder if you misread what your heart knew, and it haunted them, not always in obvious ways, but in quiet moments, late at night, in still rooms where distractions couldn't reach. The truth they've been holding isn't just a confession. It's a key, one they were afraid to use, afraid it might unlock pain, misunderstanding, or anger. But what they're starting to realize is that the real damage comes not from the truth itself, but from hiding it too long. What is this truth? It varies for each Gemini. For some, it may be a long-held apology that was never spoken, a moment they saw your vulnerability and said nothing, a choice they made out of fear that created a rupture they could never repair. For others, it may be a secret admiration they were too intimidated to voice, feelings that went unspoken because they assumed you would never feel the same, regrets that grew in the soil of what if and too late. But for nearly all, it is a truth that was shaped in love, even if poorly expressed, and is now trembling at the edge of being released. Why now? Because they've reached their limit. The silence has begun to hurt more than the risk of being misunderstood. They've come to realize that the version of you they once knew is no longer waiting in the same place. You've evolved, you've moved, and if they don't speak now, the gap between who you were and who you are becoming will grow too wide to cross. The urgency isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. The energy between you has reached a crescendo, a point where not speaking would cause more damage than the discomfort of truth. And Gemini, here's where your intuition is already one step ahead. You've sensed it, the dreams, the flashes of memory, the the strange timing of certain signs, the songs that seem to play exactly when you think of them. You've been feeling the approach. You may have even whispered their name in a quiet moment without knowing why. Your soul has already begun making space for this conversation. Even if your conscious mind hasn't fully accepted what's coming, you're not just being prepared to receive this truth. You've called for it, whether you realize it or not. There's something beautifully paradoxical about this truth. It may sting, but it will also soothe. It may feel like a wound reopened, but it will heal in cleaner, deeper ways than the scar you've been carrying, because now you are ready. Before, you might have absorbed her words like poison, internalized them as failure or fault. Now, you will receive them as clarity, as closure, as release. This is the difference time and growth make. And your growth, Gemini, is what made this moment possible. The person speaking may not know how to begin. They may seem awkward or overwhelmed, but the message will be unmistakable. And more than their words, you'll feel their intention. You'll feel the weight they've carried, the fear they've faced, the love, however complex, that finally overcame their avoidance. And in that moment, you'll be offered something incredibly rare, the chance to see yourself through the eyes of someone who never stopped seeing you. This truth may shift how you remember your story. It may explain behaviors that once felt cold or confusing. It may show you that you weren't wrong to feel what you felt, that the connection was real, even if mishandled. Or it may reveal something you never considered, something that challenges your view, but ultimately sets you free. Whatever it is, it comes bearing the medicine of honesty, not to reopen the past, but to clean it, to clear the energy, to close the loop in a way that leaves your heart lighter, not heavier. And Gemini, I won't lie to you. This moment will test you. You may feel the old patterns rise, the urge to detach, to intellectualize, to deflect with charm or humor. But if you can stay present, if you can meet this truth with the openness your higher self has been cultivating, you will leave this encounter transformed. Because the real gift isn't what they say. It's what awakens in you. A deeper clarity, a fuller self-trust, a more radical alignment with who you truly are beneath all your adaptations. This conversation isn't coming to break you. It's coming to return you, to bring you back to the version of yourself you were never meant to abandon, the one who is always whole, always worthy, always more than enough, even when misunderstood, even when unseen. This is the power of truth shared at the right time. It liberates not just the speaker, but the listener. And Gemini, you are ready to receive. You've done the work. You've waited long enough. And now, the time has come for the silence to break, and for the truth to finally take its rightful place, in light, in language, in love. Gate 3, the mirror moment. When you finally see yourself clearly. Gemini, the moment after someone speaks their long-held truth to you is not always immediate relief. It's not always forgiveness or answers or a clean closing of a chapter. Sometimes it's stillness, a sudden, deafening stillness that leaves you alone with yourself, with your breath, with the way the room feels different now, as if reality itself is exhaled. And in that silence, something sacred happens. You look into the emotional mirror that has just been held up to you, and you finally see yourself not as you've been pretending to be, not as others needed you to be, but as you actually are. And it can be shocking. This is not the kind of reflection you've rehearsed. This is not the public version of you. Not the Gemini who knows how to adjust to the energy in the room, who speaks in dual languages to meet others halfway. This is the one behind all of that. The one who always knew. The you who adapted because it was safer. The you who smiled when you were confused. Who kept conversations light when your soul wanted to weep. Who stayed when you wanted to leave. Who agreed when your truth was burning in your throat. This conversation, the one we spoke of in the previous gate, is the energetic key that unlocks this mirror moment. And once it arrives, there is no turning away. Because once you see yourself clearly, you can no longer unsee. You can no longer go back to minimizing your needs or calling it maturity. You can no longer keep playing small and labeling it humility. You can no longer keep twisting your truth into something that fits better, into someone else's version of you. The mirror doesn't lie. It shows where you've been shrinking. It shows where you've settled. but it also shows what has survived, what never bent, what still burns quietly in the center of your being, waiting for your permission to come fully alive. And here's the deeper truth, Gemini. This mirror was never truly about the other person. They were simply the vehicle, the delivery, the spark. But the reflection, that's all yours. What you see in this moment is not their perception of you. It is your soul asking if you're finally ready to honor what you've always known but couldn't always express. That you were never too much. That your emotions weren't a burden. That your ideas weren't silly. That your softness wasn't weakness. That your brilliance didn't need an apology. That your truth didn't have to be made smaller to keep others comfortable. This is what real clarity feels like. Not a list of reasons, not a logical map, but a deep, cellular knowing that something within you is realigned. That you no longer wish to betray yourself to preserve a dynamic. That you no longer wish to accept half connections, polite affections, or filtered truths. That you're willing now to be seen as you are, even if not everyone will stay when you do. Gemini, you were never meant to live in fragments. Your duality was never a flaw. It is your gift, your lens, your magic. But even your gift can be turned against you if you start believing that your ability to become anyone for others means you should become no one for yourself. And this is the mirror's greatest revelation. Not just who you are beneath the masks, but how much of your life you've spent wearing them. Not to deceive, but to survive, to connect, to belong. But now, you don't want connection that requires a costume. You don't want belonging that costs your essence. You want a life that fits the fullness of who you are. You want a love that doesn't ask you to mute your truth. You want a space where your contradictions are not problems to fix, but layers to embrace. The most heartbreaking part of this mirror moment is realizing how long you've doubted your reflection. How long you've needed someone outside you to name your worth, confirm your light, validate your dreams. But not anymore, because now you're seeing you. And when you see yourself clearly, you begin to love yourself in ways that no one else ever taught you to. You begin to become loyal to your own energy. You stop begging to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering discounts on your spirit just to be chosen. You stop editing your laughter, your joy, your strangeness, your stillness. And perhaps most powerfully, you begin to forgive yourself for staying too long, for pretending, for hiding, for making yourself palatable, for breaking your own heart to protect someone else's peace. You forgive yourself, not because you did something wrong, but because you now see how deeply you needed to be seen and how much you were willing to sacrifice in order to feel that, even briefly. And that kind of clarity doesn't just change your self-image, it changes your future. After this mirror moment, your boundaries change, your language changes, the way you hold space for yourself changes. You begin to choose differently. And as a result, life begins to respond differently. People who once depended on your adaptability will be surprised by your firmness. Situations that once kept you in limbo will lose their grip. The mirror doesn't just show you who you are. It reveals what is no longer aligned with that truth and gives it the power to release it. So Gemini, when this moment comes, and it will, you may cry. You may feel grief for the years you spent contorting yourself to stay acceptable. You may feel tenderness of the younger version of you who did what they had to do to be loved. But more than anything, you will feel strength. Not the kind that pushes through pain. The kind that rises through self-knowing. The kind that no longer needs to explain itself to be valid. And from this strength, a new Gemini is born. One who doesn't ask, who do you need me to be? But rather, who am I when I stop needing permission to exist as I am? This is not the end of the story. This is a turning point. The place where the next chapter begins. Written not for approval, but in the ink of truth. Your voice, your vision. And you won't need anyone to reflect it back for you to believe it's real, because you have seen it for yourself. And that is enough. Gate 4, the sacred disruption, when harmony is no longer enough. Gemini, for most of your life, you've been the keeper of balance, the peacemaker, the adaptable one. You've learned how to read the room before you even entered it. You've softened your voice when it felt too loud. You've swallowed your truth when it felt too sharp. You've danced through conflict with grace, always calculating the cost of honesty against the risk of disapproval. Harmony, to you, was not just a preference. It was survival. It was how you stayed close to people. It was how you preserved relationships. It was how you made sense of the world. But there comes a time in every soul's journey when harmony begins to taste like stagnation, when peace starts to feel like self-abandonment. And Gemini, that time has come. You've outgrown the version of yourself that sacrifices clarity for comfort. You've outgrown the conversations that end in polite silence instead of vulnerable truth. You've outgrown the relationships that depend on your invisibility to function. The mirror moment from before didn't just reveal who you are. It shattered the illusion that keeping the peace was always the noble choice. It showed you that sometimes the highest form of love is disruption. Sometimes the most sacred act of connection is confrontation. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is say, "This is no longer enough for me." And yes, it will be messy. When you stop performing the role others are used to, when you stop being the agreeable version of yourself, they will react. They will question. They may accuse you of changing. But that is the point. You have changed. You are changing. And change is a sacred fire. It burns away illusions. It reveals what is real. It clears space for what can actually grow. And if someone cannot meet the version of you that no longer folds, no longer dilutes, no longer compromises her truth to keep the room calm, then that is not a relationship. That is a negotiation. And your soul is done negotiating its worth. You see, Gemini, the person who's come to talk to you urgently, they are the match, but you are the spark. And the fire that is ignited won't just be between the two of you. It will ripple through every part of your life where you've been keeping still to avoid upsetting the balance. You may suddenly realize that your career no longer reflects your brilliance, that the friendship you've maintained out of habit no longer nourishes your soul, that the love you've tried to preserve at any cost has been costing you yourself. This is sacred disruption. This is the breakdown before the breakthrough. This is your soul saying, "I am no longer available for a life that asks me to apologize for being real." You may be afraid. That's natural. Disrupting harmony goes against everything you were taught to value. You were told that nice people don't stir the pot, that kind people don't speak hard truths, that strong people don't need to express their hurt. But Gemini, kindness without authenticity becomes martyrdom. Strength without vulnerability becomes isolation. And harmony without truth becomes a prison. And you are not here to be a prisoner. You are here to be a force of movement. You are here to express the full spectrum of your spirit. You are here to teach the world what it means to be both and to be light and deep, sensitive and bold, flexible and firm. But that duality can only thrive when both sides are honored, not when one is buried to keep things peaceful. The sacred disruption you're stepping into is not destruction. It is liberation. It is a clearing of what no longer serves to make room for what will truly sustain you. And yes, some people will leave. But what if their leaving is a gift? What if their absence is a space you need for something more aligned to enter? You've been holding on to too much for too long. Gemini, holding space for others who don't show up for you. Holding your tongue when your soul was screaming. Holding your breath. Hoping someone would see your pain without you having to say it. But you don't have to hold it anymore. You are allowed to release, to say no, to disappoint others if it means not disappointing yourself anymore. This is what self-respect looks like in real time. It's not loud or rebellious. It's not unkind. It's clear. It's steady. It says, "I can love you and still choose me. I can honor your feelings without betraying my own. I can wish you peace and still walk away if staying cost me my truth." And when you do this, when you choose sacred disruption over silent self-erasure, the universe responds. It brings you people who don't ask you to shrink. Opportunities that match your full expression. A version of life that doesn't just look peaceful, but feels like freedom. And isn't that what you've really been longing for all along? Not just to be loved, but to be loved as you are. So yes, the conversation coming will stir something. It will reveal what you've tolerated in the name of peace. It will show you what you're ready to release. And it will ask you, are you willing to lose what no longer fits to make room for what finally does? This is your moment to choose. Not from fear, not from guilt, but from power, from clarity, from a deep knowing that the time for pretending is over and the time for being has finally begun. This is a sacred disruption that clears your path, not to burn bridges, but to cross new ones, not to tear down, but to build something real. It may feel like a storm, but on the other side is a sky wide enough to hold all of you without condition, without compromise. And it begins now with the words you're about to hear, the truth you're about to speak, and the life you're about to live unapologetically. Gate 5, when the conversation ends and the real transformation begins. Gemini, when the words are finally spoken, when the conversation ends and the room falls quiet again, something subtle but irreversible happens inside you. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's undeniable. A shift, a release, a softening in places you've held tight for too long. The person may have left, the message may have been delivered, and yet you remain, standing in the stillness, holding not just their truth but your own. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because now you are no longer carrying other people's expectations in silence. Now you are no longer asking yourself if it's okay to feel what you feel. Now the door has opened, not just to a new chapter, but to a new version of you. The kind of version that no longer needs to wait for permission to exist. You may find yourself reflecting on the conversation over and over in your mind, not because you're stuck in it, but because each layer reveals a new insight. You'll start to realize that what was said was never just about them. It was about what you allowed, what you tolerated, what you dismissed as small to keep the bigger picture intact. But Gemini, you're beginning to see that no piece of yourself is small enough to be dismissed. Every suppressed truth has a weight. Every delayed boundary has a consequence. And now, as you finally sit with yourself fully, you begin to understand how much energy you spent trying to keep everything together while quietly falling apart. And still, you survived. And not just survived, you evolved. You began this journey as someone who mastered the art of flexibility, the gift of communication, the charm of adaptability. But those qualities were forged in environments that often asked you to use them as defense mechanisms. Now they become tools of conscious creation. Because what you're building now is not a version of yourself shaped by others' comfort. It's a life that reflects the truth of who you are. You're no longer creating harmony at your own expense. You're creating resonance. And that requires a different kind of courage. The courage to disappoint others without betraying yourself. As this post-conversation phase unfolds, you'll notice the small but profound ways your world begins to respond to this new frequency. People who once assumed you'd say yes begin to hesitate, sensing your shift. Invitations you used to accept out of obligation now feel misaligned. Even your language begins to change. You speak more slowly, with more intention. You ask different questions. You stop explaining yourself so much. Why? Because you realize that understanding is not a requirement for being. You don't owe anyone a justification for choosing your wholeness. And perhaps the most unexpected part of this transformation is the grief. Not sadness for what was said, but for what wasn't said sooner. Grief for the moments you smiled when you wanted to speak. For the years you twisted your desires into something smaller, quieter, easier to digest. You'll feel a mourning, not of a relationship, but of the version of you who believed you had to disappear to be loved. That version did their best. But now they can rest, because you've arrived. Gemini, you've always been a messenger, a translator between worlds, ideas, emotions. But you've also always been someone who longs to be understood in the same depth you so freely offer others. And now, something is being returned to you. Not just truth, but clarity. Not just clarity, but power. The power to decide what stays in your life. The power to discern what truly aligns. The power to say, I choose me, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. Because you are no longer here to be tolerated. You are here to resonate, to express, to expand. You may find yourself shedding more than you expected. Not just people, but habits, roles, identities. You'll stop saying yes to things that no longer light you up. You'll stop entertaining dynamics that depend on your silence. You'll stop apologizing for your presence. This is the kind of transformation that doesn't announce itself in big gestures. It's the quiet shift in how you walk into a room, how you take up space, how you stop shrinking, and how you start trusting your own voice more than the noise around you. And if in this process you lose people, let that loss be sacred. Let it be an act of return. Because what you're really losing is the illusion that you ever had to sacrifice yourself to keep them. What you're gaining is alignment, not with their version of you, but with your own. And that is the beginning of everything. This transformation is not the end of your duality. It's the celebration of it. You're still a Gemini, still complex, still dynamic, still full of layers. But now, you no longer have to fracture yourself to survive. Now, you get to bring your whole self to the table. And those who are meant to sit with you will not flinch. They will not ask you to be less. They will meet you there in your truth, in your fullness, in your power. So as the echo of that urgent conversation fades and life resumes its rhythm, take a breath. Feel into the new spaciousness within you. This is what alignment feels like. This is what healing tastes like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. And it will keep growing. It will keep unfolding. Because you're no longer running from who you are. You're walking directly toward it. Steady, sovereign, sacred. Conclusion: you are no longer waiting. You are becoming. Gemini, if you've come this far, if your heart has made it to the quiet ache of realization, the courageous mirror of truth, and the sacred disruption that followed, then know this. You are no longer the person who began this journey. You are no longer the one who waited in silence for someone else to say what needed to be said. You are no longer the one who disguised your pain behind a smile or your wisdom behind diplomacy. You are becoming someone braver, someone clearer, someone deeply aligned with their truth, not as performance, but as essence. This conversation that entered your life, it wasn't a disruption, it was a liberation. It shook the foundation so that you could finally see what parts were built on borrowed expectations. And now, Gemini, you are free to choose again. You are free to speak, to leave, to stay, to love, to begin, all from a place that honors you. The real you, not the agreeable version, not the polished performer, but the brilliant, layered, deeply feeling, beautifully complex soul that you are. As you move forward, there will still be moments of discomfort. There will still be echoes of the old patterns calling you back. But now, you know what it costs to betray yourself, and you've decided the price is too high. Let that awareness be your anchor. Let it remind you that every time you choose truth over performance, you are healing not only yourself, but the generations before you who couldn't. If this message touched you, I invite you to share in the comments. Not for me, but for you. What clarity rose to the surface? What are you ready to release? What truth have you long held in your heart that is finally ready to be spoken? Your words may be the reflection someone else needs to find their own.